Her voice didn't rise. She didn't plead or flinch. That's what hit me first. Not the photo. Not the jacket on a stranger's shoulders. Not the soft half-smile that told me she wasn't caught off guard. She was just caught. It meant nothing. She said it while I stood there in the hallway, her phone in my hand, the screen still glowing with the gallery open. That one image. Just one. But more than enough. I looked down at it again. The man had his arm around her, not tight, not possessive. Casual. Familiar. She leaned in. Not performative. Just comfortable. Like they'd done this a dozen times. Like he belonged in that jacket, even though it was mine. He wore it like I used to, half-zipped, collar turned up. The way she once said made me look like someone with a plan. She didn't move to take the phone back. She just stood barefoot near the dining table, one hand still resting on her wine glass like we were still mid-conversation about her day. I handed it to her. She took it without looking. Then I walked past her, past the plates we hadn't cleared, past the candle she always lit when she cooked, past the jacket she left slung over the chair that wasn't mine. I walked into my office, shut the door, and sat down like I was about to start a spreadsheet, not unravel a marriage. My laptop was still open, email tab flickering with new alerts, but one window sat behind everything. Apple Photos. A syncing error had pulled some of her gallery images into my calendar account earlier that day. I'd seen the icon in passing, clicked to troubleshoot. That's when the image opened. Her. Him. My jacket. The date stamp punched the air out of my lungs. Last Saturday. She told me she was on a solo meditation retreat, somewhere upstate. No phones, no distractions, just reflection. She'd come back quiet, a little distant. I'd chalked it up to the retreat doing what it was supposed to do. I never doubted her. I didn't check her phone. I didn't track her. I trusted the rhythms we'd built. Or maybe I trusted the version of her I still wanted to believe existed. Back in the present, I clicked info. The location tagged a downtown boutique hotel. A place we'd once joked about, modern, overpriced. Great lighting for secrets, she'd said once, laughing at some influencer who got caught there. I stared at the screen. My reflection ghosted across the black bezel. A man too careful, too steady, too blind. I zoomed in. He wore my hoodie underneath the jacket, one I hadn't seen in weeks. I'd asked about it once, she'd said laundry. On her left hand, no ring. I looked at my own hand. The circle of gold caught the desk lamp. I didn't feel anything sharp. Not yet. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was the cold slide of clarity. A knowing that slipped beneath everything else and clicked into place. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't heat of the moment. This was planned, covered, named something else to keep me soft. Solo meditation retreat. Nothing had ever sounded so well rehearsed. I clicked through a few more images. Just normal things. A dinner plate, hotel curtains, a charcuterie board, 2 glasses, one hand visible, his holding hers. I shut the laptop. I didn't go back into the dining room. That night, I lay awake beside her. She shifted in her sleep, rolled toward me, her breath warm against my shoulder. I didn't move. She murmured something in her sleep, my name, the same way she always had, like it was home. But I wasn't hers anymore. I just hadn't told her yet. The next morning, she made pancakes, from scratch. The kind with cinnamon and vanilla she only bothered with on birthdays or slow Sundays. The kitchen smelled warm, familiar. She moved in the space like everything was still intact, like I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Coffee? She asked, holding the pot out with a soft smile. Not guilty, just gentle, like she was being careful not to wake something that might still sleep. I took the mug, said thanks. Saturday. She poured her own, stirred in almond milk the way she always did, like the small rituals still held power. And maybe they did, but only for her. I watched her over the rim of my cup. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, leaned on the counter, eyes drifting toward the window. Peaceful. Or performing peace. Either way, convincing. I waited until she left for solo therapy. That's what she called it. Weekly appointments that had started 6 months ago after a drift she couldn't explain. She needed time, she'd said. Space to process. I hadn't argued. I believed in growth. I thought giving her room was the loving thing to do. But now I knew where the extra time had gone. She left at 10 a.m. The car backed out of the driveway smooth as always. I watched it through the upstairs window, waited 3 minutes, then went into her study. She kept her journal there, usually locked. But this morning, she'd left it, or forgotten it, on the desk. Open. Like the cinnamon pancakes had disarmed her. Or maybe she just believed I wouldn't look. It wasn't a confessional. Nothing explicit. She was smarter than that. But it was there, between the lines, emotional drift rebranded as discovery. Sentences like, "I need something that wakes me up again," or, "He listens but doesn't really see me." Vague, poetic, empty. The name wasn't mentioned, but the timeline matched. I traced her language, weeks where she'd gone silent to think, lined up exactly with calendar nights where no therapy was booked. Hotel charges on our joint credit card that I'd never noticed. Different locations, all downtown, all late check-ins. I pulled my laptop and opened the synced image again. I stared at the timestamp, 3 months ago. That was the beginning, or at least the earliest proof. I opened the joint account, filtered for those dates. Hotel names popped up like a breadcrumb trail she never thought I'd follow. Then I checked our garage camera archives. We didn't review them often, usually only for package thefts. But the timestamps helped. 2 different Saturdays she'd pulled in late, after midnight. Then, 10 minutes later, the backseat door closed. A figure exited. Not her. A man, tall, dark jacket, hood up. She hadn't even waited until he was gone to come inside. In the footage, her silhouette paused before she entered the house. She turned, looked back at the driveway. No rush. No panic. Just stillness. Then she opened the door and walked in. Back into my life. Back under the same roof. I paused the video. Rewatched that single moment. Her glance back 3 times. It wasn't guilt I saw. It was calculation. A practiced rhythm. That's when I understood. This wasn't about slipping. It was about building something parallel. Quietly. Patiently. She hadn't betrayed me on impulse. She'd done it with intent. Scheduled it between therapy and dinner plans. Budgeted for it like a recurring bill. Gave it names I wouldn't question. Escape. Healing. Clarity. I closed the laptop and slid her journal back exactly where it had been. I wiped the mouse. Adjusted the seat. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was auditing. That's what this had become. A personal audit. A quiet excavation of the life I thought I knew. And she hadn't noticed a thing. That evening, we sat on the porch with wine. She talked about her sister's promotion like everything was fine. I nodded in the right places, asked follow-up questions. I watched the way her eyes moved, open, relaxed. Whatever guilt she'd carried had been packed neatly away. The phone buzzed on the armrest between us. She ignored it. Casual. Confident. Not because she had nothing to hide, but because she believed I'd never look again. Or maybe because the man knew better than to message during home hours. When she excused herself to shower, I picked up her phone. Not to read. I didn't need to anymore. The gallery sync had already handed me what I needed. Now I was mapping the ecosystem, backtracking her orbit. The phone was locked, but we shared a passcode for travel emergencies. She'd never changed it. I tapped into her messages, not for the man. I assumed by now they used a separate app or burner account. But her best friend, Rachel? That was different. Rachel had always played the supportive outsider, listening but never prying. She'd kept her distance through our rough patches, never took sides. Or so I thought. But there it was, in plain text. 2 weeks ago. Rachel. You're glowing again. That night must have been worth it. Emily. We needed it. I needed it. He's the opposite of everything I deal with at home. My name was never mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. Worse was the thread from 4 weeks ago, after our dinner with potential investors. A man named Julian had joined, someone I'd met briefly through a colleague. Clean-cut, observant, the kind who remembered small details. We talked strategy, then clinked glasses over market forecasts. That same night, Emily had texted Rachel. Emily. He introduced him like it was nothing. Full circle. Rachel had replied with a gif. Applause. I froze. I opened my work files and scanned the cap table. There he was. Julian M., silent investor, through a proxy LLC. The ink had dried 2 months ago. She hadn't just crossed the line. She'd invited him into my company. My team. My vision. I remembered shaking his hand. The firm grip. The half-smile. How he asked where I saw things going in 5 years. He'd known exactly what I was building, because she'd shown him. This wasn't personal escapism. It was infiltration. And her best friend had known the entire time. I stared at the message. He introduced him like it was nothing. There was something almost cruel in the phrasing, as if it had been staged. A private joke between them, a shared thrill. I placed the phone back on the armrest as I heard water shut off upstairs. I stepped back outside, picked up my glass, and took a long sip. By the time she returned, hair wet, face clean, draped in the robe I'd bought her on our last trip to Charleston, I looked up and smiled like nothing had changed. "Want to watch something?" she asked, curling beside me. "Sure," I said, reaching for the remote. "You pick." She leaned into me. I kept my breathing even. But inside, the shift had happened. The mask was on. The clock had started. Now it was my turn to stage something. And I'd make sure the script ended on my terms. I didn't sleep that night, not fully. I lay next to her with my eyes half closed, breath slow and steady so she wouldn't notice. She shifted in her sleep again around 3 a.m., murmuring something I couldn't make out. Her hand brushed my arm, searching for contact. I didn't move. I let her fingers settle and then slip away. At dawn, I got up and drove to the office early, under the pretense of catching up on vendor calls. The truth was simpler. I needed distance, and I needed to think where she couldn't watch me do it. In my office, I sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the sun filter in through the blinds, striping the hardwood floor in broken gold. I remembered our launch party last spring, the way she'd introduced herself to Julian like it was their first meeting. I replayed the handshake in my mind, the glint in her eye when he complimented the tasting menu, how quickly she'd switched subjects when I mentioned growth projections. She'd always had a good poker face. Now I understood why. I pulled the text chain again from the cloud backup I'd made while she was in the shower. It was the message that stuck with me. "I'm just waiting for the right moment to leave," her response. Not something she'd say if she meant to stay. Timestamp: 6 weeks before our anniversary trip. A trip she'd planned, supposedly to reconnect, to breathe life back into things. It hadn't been a gift. It was a delay. I remembered that weekend vividly. How she'd smiled over dessert. How she'd sat on the balcony that night, sipping wine and talking about maybe moving somewhere quieter, closer to the coast. I thought it was her way of softening again. She'd even reached for my hand once, her fingers tracing the back of mine like she was rediscovering something worth holding onto. She was saying goodbye, and I hadn't known. I opened my legal folder. My attorney, Leslie, had been on retainer for years, mostly for business, but I trusted her with more delicate matters when needed. I drafted the first message. Subject: request for review, urgent personal matter. Attached were 3 images: the hotel photo, the journal page I'd discreetly scanned, and the message thread with Rachel. I included one line beneath. "Please advise on pre-filing protections. Timeline: under the radar. By lunch," Leslie responded. Short, clinical, efficient. "Recommend filing for separation and asset freeze. Suggest initiating under business grounds for discretion. Can prepare docs by Friday." I sat back. Friday was 3 days away. Emily texted me mid-afternoon. "Thinking of making shrimp linguine tonight. That okay?" I stared at the message. Her tone hadn't changed. Still thoughtful, casual. She still thought the clock hadn't moved. I typed back. "Sounds great. Want me to pick up wine?" I pressed send. Then I forwarded Leslie's email to my secure drive and set a calendar block for Friday morning. Quiet action. Do not move. When I got home, she was already chopping garlic. Jazz played softly in the background, one of the records I'd bought her for Christmas. She turned when I walked in and smiled. "Hey, long day?" I kissed her on the cheek. "Yeah, but this helps." She looked pleased, like she was still in control of the atmosphere. Still scripting the scenes. I poured wine. We talked about neutral things, her sister's new puppy, a vacation ad that popped up on her feed, the price of produce. Everything light, everything surface. But I was no longer listening. I was studying. 3 more days. Then the performance would end. She didn't know anything yet. Not when she left for brunch with her sister, not when she kissed me goodbye at the door like a woman confident in her illusion. Her tone had even softened this week. More touch, more questions about my day, more careful little glances when she thought I wasn't looking. As if she sensed the ground shifting but couldn't quite place the source. I let her think it was working. Let her believe the performance held. By 10 a.m., she was seated at a patio cafe on Elm and Rockwell. Her sister's car was parked across the street. A few seats away, a man in a navy sweater read the journal and waited for my signal. He wasn't there for surveillance. He was the courier. At 10:17 a.m., he stood, adjusted his watch, and stepped forward with a black folder. Inside, petition for separation, temporary asset freeze, notification of intent to restructure business shares, all pre-signed by me. My initials, small and sharp, marked every bottom corner. He handed it to her with one word. Delivery. She took it, brows knitting, probably thinking it was from a brand rep or a campaign manager. Her sister looked at the folder, then back at her. Emily flipped it open, and I imagined the moment her eyes landed on my name. I wasn't there to see her face. That was intentional. Back at the office, my inbox pinged. Leslie had confirmed delivery. Subject line. All filed. Timeline locked. Court date, TBA. Below, she'd attached the freeze confirmation. Our joint accounts were no longer joint. The business shares had been flagged for audit, and a removal clause had been triggered, silent investors included. Julian would receive notice by Monday. Emily texted at 10:43 a.m. We need to talk. I didn't reply. Instead, I called IT and had them begin the revocation process for all shared digital access, passwords, logins, cloud permissions. Then I signed off on the PR draft from our legal team. A quiet ownership restructuring statement, wrapped in business language. Nothing personal, no drama. By noon, her number tried again. Missed call, Emily. I ignored it. She messaged once more, a longer block this time. I don't understand what you're doing. Can we please talk before this gets worse? I stared at the screen for a full minute, then archived the thread. It wasn't worse. It was honest. At 1 p.m., Rachel messaged me for the first time in over a year. No greeting. Just, she's spiraling. Can we meet? I blocked the number. This wasn't a reconciliation tour. This was extraction. At 2:14 p.m., my assistant forwarded a link. Emily had posted a story. A still image of a coffee cup on her lap. The caption. Some betrayals come in the quiet. No tags, no explanation. Just an attempt to reframe the narrative. But silence wasn't her weapon anymore. Now it was mine. And I wasn't done yet. We should talk, she said again, softer now, like her voice alone could slow everything that had already been set in motion. I stood at the office window, watching the courtyard where interns walked between buildings, papers in hand, none of them knowing how much had changed in the past 4 hours. We will, I told her, calm and final. But not over the phone. A pause stretched too long. Then she asked, Are you trying to punish me? I nearly laughed, not out loud, but inwardly. The framing was too familiar. The moment consequences arrived, it wasn't accountability she reached for. It was injury. Her injury. I'd seen her do it to others. Never thought she'd aim it at me. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm just stopping the performance. She didn't respond. I waited, then ended the call. By 4 p.m., the buyout was wired. Clean. Undisputable. The amount we'd agreed on during our last business audit, long before I knew who she'd invited into my infrastructure. She could spin the narrative however she wanted, but the numbers were neutral, precise, and final. At 4:01 p.m., her access to the company's back-end systems was revoked. Email, admin dashboards, cloud accounts tied to operations. She wasn't just out of the partnership. She no longer existed in the ecosystem. By 4:02, Leslie's team released the formal PR statement. New executive ownership, same company mission. The language was smooth, curated, and included a small but meaningful line. Leadership transition reflects a long-planned evolution. By 4:03, she was irrelevant. Her name was gone from the website. Her bio pulled from our board documents. Every trace archived, legally preserved, practically erased. I sat back in my chair and let the clock run a little. At 4:17 p.m., my receptionist knocked gently. She's here, she said, eyes guarded. Asked to speak with you directly? I nodded once. Give her the box. 5 minutes later, the security feed showed Emily standing in the lobby, clutching a cardboard container. Inside were her personal items from the office. A scarf, a framed photo of her and her sister, a small plant she used to water once a week. On top sat a keyring, house, office, storage, and a manila envelope. Inside was the original photo, the one that started it all, folded once, neatly. On the back I'd written, Now it means less. She stood there for several seconds after reading it. Then she left. No outburst, no scene, just slow steps toward the elevator. I watched until the feed blinked out. That night I didn't go home. I stayed late, met with counsel, reviewed next week's transitions. When I finally stepped out into the night, the air felt sharper, cleaner. She hadn't just lied. She'd built a version of our life out of pieces she knew I'd never question. Until I did. And once I did, she had nowhere left to stand. Not even the stage. The silence stretched for 2 days. No calls, no texts, no pop-ups from friends trying to smooth the edges. It was as if someone had cut the string on the puppet show and left the stage lights on just long enough for everyone to see the wires. Then came the first ripple, an alert from the business monitoring service I subscribed to. Julian had withdrawn his capital from the fund, quietly, quickly, likely assuming he could do it clean, without exposure. Too late. The moment Leslie's firm filed the internal restructuring documents, every silent partner had been reviewed. His name, through the Shell LLC, now sat in a folder labeled Conflicted Interests, not illegal, but public enough to stain him professionally. I didn't need to retaliate, I just needed to shine a light. 2 hours later, I heard from another investor. Short message. Had no idea what was happening. You handled it. That was the extent of it. Handled. Not exposed. Not dramatized. Just corrected. I heard through a third party that Emily had called Julian 3 times. No response. He'd already severed the contact trail. The man who'd once wrapped his arm around her in a borrowed jacket had vanished the moment the temperature dropped. And her friends? Most of them stayed quiet. The ones who leaned into her curated drama found themselves untagged in her latest posts. The story she'd published, the one with the coffee cup and the vague caption, was deleted within a day. There was no flood of sympathy. No string of, "You deserve better." Her sister, I heard, said it straight. "What exactly did you expect him to do?" By then, the accounts were frozen, her access revoked, the credit line we once shared shut down. The house was under my name alone. The legal protection around it was already impenetrable. Every attempt she made to reclaim footing was met with quiet legality. That was the difference between us. She moved in shadows. I moved in structure. The part that stayed with me, strangely, was a screenshot I'd missed earlier, one from her messages to Julian, buried in a folder I hadn't reviewed in full. She'd sent him transcripts of our arguments. She'd taken my lowest moments, the nights I'd questioned myself, or pulled back to avoid saying something I'd regret, and used them as material. "He's too soft. He overthinks everything." Soft. She used to say that was what made me different. That I actually thought before I spoke. That I considered her, instead of just reacting. But in the end, that same caution, the effort not to crush what we'd built, had become the thing she mocked most. She'd already left me long before the documents arrived. But now, finally, I'd caught up, and I'd left her back. 3 days after she disappeared from the office lobby, she posted again. A picture of sunlight on water, some filtered image from a hike we never took, with a caption about resilience and new chapters, her version of emotional rebranding. The tone was vague enough to invite pity, but ambiguous enough to avoid specifics. No comments. No engagement. Not even from Rachel. The network had thinned out faster than I expected. Not because I exposed her. I didn't have to. People just stopped aligning with a version of her that no longer held power. Even the brand deal she'd been teasing for weeks, one of those lifestyle partnerships with vague wellness slogans and affiliate links, quietly disappeared. I checked the site. Her name was gone from the announcement draft. She'd overestimated her insulation. Julian wasn't returning messages. The people who once saw her as sharp and social now watched with narrowed eyes, waiting for a narrative that never came. And her sister? She stayed neutral, family-bound, but distant. There was only so much damage even blood could cover. I received a single email from Emily that week. No subject line. No greeting. Just, "I never meant for it to become all this. I thought we were just drifting." I read it once, closed the tab. Never replied. Drifting is what happens when no one steers. What she'd done wasn't drift. It was excavation. Planned, hidden, and executed with strategy, until it collapsed under its own deceit. When she realized I wouldn't respond, she made one more move. She showed up at my building again. No receptionist call this time. She waited outside, just her, a soft gray sweater, and a small leather bag I recognized from last Christmas. She looked smaller than I remembered. Security saw her on the camera, asked if I wanted to be notified. I didn't answer. Instead, I left the office through the back garage entrance, and walked half a block to the coffee shop where I knew she wouldn't follow. I stayed there for 20 minutes. When I returned, she was gone. On my desk sat a thin white envelope. No note. Inside was the key to our first apartment, wrapped in one of my old t-shirts. There was no message, but I understood it. She wasn't trying to undo anything now. She was trying to be remembered kindly. But kindness wasn't what I owed her anymore. What I owed myself was distance, and I was finally giving it. It's strange how silence rearranges a person. Not the kind between arguments or in waiting rooms, but the deeper kind. The kind that settles after you've removed someone from your calendar, your passwords, your plans. The kind that doesn't ask for resolution because it already arrived in a different form. The legal dust was settling. Her name no longer showed on any title. The real estate trust had been updated, notarized, filed. The firm managed it cleanly. No courtroom scenes. Just clean ink and empty lines where her name used to sit. I walked through the house one morning, not searching, just checking. She hadn't tried to reclaim anything. No requests for the furniture she obsessed over. No emails about shared art, kitchen tools, or keepsakes. It wasn't apathy. It was pride. She'd rather pretend it didn't matter than admit she'd built a life inside mine. But she had. And now she was locked out of it. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one where I'd placed the envelope she'd left outside the office. The key to our first apartment was still inside. We hadn't lived there in 6 years. It had creaked in the winter and leaked in the spring. But it was ours, tiny, sunlit, noisy. It had witnessed our early mornings and late fights and the first time she ever said she believed in something we were building. Now she'd returned the key like it held meaning. But it didn't. Not anymore. I didn't throw it away. Not out of nostalgia, just practicality. One less errand. One less message she could misread as attention. I boxed it, labeled it, and slid it onto the high shelf in the garage. By Friday, the final statement had posted. Emily's name formally removed from the executive register. Ownership restructured. Tax ID updated. The company was mine clean. No drama. No exposure. Just quiet, legal closure. One of the junior analysts forwarded me her latest post. Another attempt to reclaim the narrative. A blurred photo of an empty chair. Caption. Closure isn't always a conversation. She was right about that. Some closures don't need words. Just actions. And a door that doesn't reopen. The final stage wasn't a scene. It was a checklist. The last of the joint credit lines closed. The mortgage reissued in my name alone. A final audit from Leslie's team ensured all accounts, subscriptions, and points of access were severed, clean, enforceable, and dated. Emily didn't contest any of it. That, more than anything, told me she'd already counted herself out before the legal papers ever arrived. She wasn't fighting to come back, only to preserve the illusion that she could have stayed, if not for timing. If not for me. The truth was simpler. She didn't just want out, she wanted to rewrite her exit. But the thread had already snapped. Every attempt she made to spin things online, vague captions, muted melancholy, soft-toned references to loss, fell flat. There were no likes from the usual orbit, no comments from the curated inner circle. Her name slowly began to drop off the radar. It turns out, absence isn't powerful when the people watching know it's curated. She tried to schedule a podcast appearance through one of our mutual contacts, something about reclaiming voice after betrayal. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. The host never responded. The man she'd risked everything for, Julian, had gone radio silent the moment legal got involved. His name came up once more, in an automated system email forwarding his LLC's removal from our funding round. He didn't ghost her out of shame. He ghosted her out of strategy. No one wants their name tied to a collapsing narrative, and that's what she'd become. One person, alone, with a story no one believed anymore. I spent Saturday morning clearing out the last of her things from the back closet. A few scarves, an old laptop charger, a collection of wellness books she never actually read. I packed them without ceremony, without delay. There was no need to revisit, no need to ask why. I drove the box to the donation center and left it there with the others. No note, no announcement. When I returned home, the house felt quieter, but not emptier. That's the difference. It wasn't about what was missing. It was about what could finally begin. I never blocked her. That was deliberate. I wanted her to see what came next, not out of cruelty, but clarity. To understand that I didn't collapse. I didn't react. I rebuilt. And I didn't need her name, her approval, or her explanations to do it. 2 weeks after everything finalized, she sent one last message. No pleading. No demands. Just a line and a half. If you ever want to talk like people who once loved each other, I'm still here. There was no point in answering. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because she already knew the truth. You can't come back from something you burned in silence. You can't rebuild from ashes you scattered intentionally. And I had no intention of circling the wreckage just to reassure her that she meant something once. Because she did. And that's what made her betrayal strategic. Not spontaneous. Not emotional. But logistical. She handed over my routines, my vulnerabilities, made me a reference point for someone else. And then she called it escape. I'd let that go now. Not forgiven. Just released. My focus returned to the business. My team felt it too, a sharper edge, clearer direction. Without the noise of someone siphoning my energy behind closed doors, I moved faster, more precise, more forward. There was no celebration, no toast, just progress. I started running again, something I hadn't done in months. 5 miles before sunrise, silence in my ears, no podcasts, no distractions, just motion, forward. Sometimes I'd pass by streets we once walked together. Once, I saw her car parked near a gallery she used to love. I didn't look inside, didn't wonder who she was with, not because it didn't matter, because it no longer controlled the rhythm of my life. The final step came without announcement. The last paper to sign, asset transfer completion for the trust tied to our old shared investments. My attorney slid it across the table. I signed it without hesitation, and when I walked out of that building, there was no grief, no triumph, just a quiet realization that I'd done what needed to be done, not for revenge, but for return, to myself.